Hello and welcome to Psychodynamic Psychology. My name is Alina. I'm a German psychoanalyst in training, and in case you're also a psychotherapist in training and you should read more, or you're just an absolute psychology nerd looking to discover very niche psychoanalytic psychodynamic books, I hope to take you along on a chatty monthly recap of what I read as a psychoanalyst in training in the months of October and November 2024. So in the month of October and November 2024, I read, first of all, The Waning of the Oedipus Complex by Hans Loewald. Then I read another article called Why Read Fairbairn by Thomas Ogden. Then I read a book, actually reread this book in my Patreon book club, called Introduction to the Practice of Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy by Alessandra Lemma. Then I read Feminine Psychology by Karen Horney, which is her essay collection of her earliest articles, essay, etc. And then the final book I finished in November is A Mind of Her Own, The Life of Karen Horney by Susan Quinn, which is the biography of Karen Horney. And actually what I'm looking at right now to give you this recap into what I've been reading is my Psychodynamic library. It's a database I built out in Notion where I document everything I've ever read, together with interesting details such as when it was published, how many pages, and most importantly, I try to include my notes whenever possible. So if you want to get your hands on this and find some more inspiration for your potentially next favorite book, who knows, feel free to sign up to my newsletter, to my email list, and then I will send this list your way. But yeah, anyways, let's get started, and let's start with the first article I read in October 2024, actually. And that is The Waning of the Oedipus Complex by Hans Loewald. It was published in 2000, but it's actually an older article. It was written in 1978. And I found this article through one of Thomas Ogden's papers. I think it's called Breaking Down. No, he wrote a paper about Winnicott. I'm going to put up whatever this is called here because I can't remember right now. And in it, he put together I think 5 thought-changing papers that he read in his lifetime. And one of them was from Melanie Klein. One of them was from Fairbairn. This is actually what made me read and discover Fairbairn. This is the Fairbairn book. I don't know if you can see this. Is this focusing? Yeah, now it is. Here we go. This is the book I read about Fairbairn. Loved it. So I was like, okay, Thomas Ogden, like he's onto something. I mean, he recommended, Mourning and Melancholia by Freud, which I love, a paper by Melanie Klein, which I really enjoyed, and then, this about Fairbairn. So I was like, okay, like whatever else he has on this list, I need to read it. So the other paper that he recommended was exactly this one, The Waning of the Oedipus Complex by Hans Loewald. This, I'm currently working on doing a deep dive into this paper because it is very interesting. But also, it feels like, you kind of have an idea of what the Oedipus complex is. And then you read this paper and you're just confused all over again. So, it's very dense. It's tough. It's not a beginner-friendly read. But I've started to put together my notes and put them together in the way that makes sense. And I hope to present you like a deep dive on this paper, maybe in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know how long this is going to take me because it is very interesting. And again, Thomas Ogden, he has good recommendations. So the paper by Hans Loewald is only 10 pages. So it's not, like a Fairbairn or like another book that has like 300, 400 pages. It's very succinct, 10 pages, but it's dense. He basically tries to make an argument of why the Oedipus complex still matters, even though in, modern and even back then, like in the 70s, the psychodynamic thinking kind of moved more towards pre-Oedipal stages. with Melanie Klein, with Margaret Mahler, with attachment theory, also Kohut, like everyone, moved away from this time period of 3 to 6 years when, in the phallic phase, when the Oedipus complex is important and so on. And they moved to pre-Oedipal issues of separation, individuation, also narcissistic issues, everything that, in most psychoanalytic theories is deemed to arise in those stages. And Loewald basically says, if you want to, put it bluntly, that the Oedipus complex still matters and it has a very important tie to those early stages, which he tries to elaborate. He basically says, well, you psychically have to kill your parents, like in your mind, in your inner world. You have to kill your parents to usurp the authority and be able to become an adult, take on responsibility, be able to handle the guilt that comes with cutting that tie, cutting that very, very special bond. And yeah, I mean, even now that I hear myself talking about it, it sounds so weird, but I'll try to gather my thoughts and walk you through this paper the best as I can, because it does have a few very interesting points that he discusses. Next, I moved on to some Thomas Ogden. I've been trying to get my hands on some of his books. I try to buy used books because they're just more affordable, and as a psychoanalyst in training, we don't have much money. And they're just always sold out. I couldn't really get my hands on his book yet, so I started with some of his articles. And I mean, what would make more sense to read, especially after I read this, based on his recommendation, what would make more sense than to read the paper that he called Why Read Fairbairn by Thomas Ogden, published 2010. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's a wonderful paper. It really argues for the value that Fairbairn's theories add to object relations theory, especially, how he can be used complementary to Melanie Klein. And it just really makes it easier to make sense of his theory. Because even though, Thomas Ogden, he's not an easy writer, someone who makes it very digestible, as, for example, Nancy McWilliams does. But he makes some very interesting points. It's 21 pages, so it's still doable. And I think if you want to dive into Fairbairn, and sometimes, his original work might be a bit challenging and a bit too much to start with, I think a paper like this is a very interesting way to complement your reading. I really enjoyed it. I'm very much looking forward to diving more into Thomas Ogden books. So in case you have any recommendations, in case there's any book of his that you really enjoy, let me know in the comments below, because I think him and Christopher Bollas, I only covered his book on my podcast, whereas the book I read of his is called, maybe you can see it, The Shadow of the Object. I don't know if it's focusing. Yeah, here we go. This is a book by Christopher Bollas that I talked about in another podcast episode. Really enjoyed it. I think him and Thomas Ogden are kind of the two very well-known, very, innovative psychodynamic thinkers. So I can really recommend that. And in case you have any recommendation for Thomas Ogden, please let me know. The next book I read, or I should actually say we read in November, is Introduction to the Practice of Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy by Alessandra Lemma. It's published in 2015. And we actually read that in my Patreon book club. So in case you are a beginner psychotherapist in training, this might be a fun thing for you to join. I'm going to link that below as well. But we read this book. It had 330 pages. We actually read that split through to 2 months. And, it was a solid introduction. I'm going to put, some of the contents that she covers on this site if you want to check it out. It's solid. By now, I have read a lot of those, introductory works, and I must say that I prefer Nancy McWilliams' introduction. She wrote what was it called? I need to look it up. Where is it? Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy, a Practitioner's Guide. The one thing I really enjoyed about Lemma's book, which I have not read in any other introduction, was how she differentiated between two memory systems, one being the declarative and the other the procedural. And the declarative memory is, what is known as explicit or autobiographical memory. If you are a psychology student, you might have heard about that in your neuropsychology class. And this is the underlying organization of, consciously recalling facts, events, and the like. For example, if I say, my favorite vacation was the one in Rome, and Rome was founded 700 something BC. Also, we had real Italian ice cream, which was delicious. That would be something that would be stored in my declarative memory. And this language, as you can tell, it requires language, and therefore it needs a proper developed prefrontal cortex and a hippocampus. And therefore, we do not have those declarative memories before the age of 3. It's just not possible because our brain is not fully developed and because we don't master a language yet in order to store those memories. So it's not, as Freud said, that there's some sort of, childhood amnesia that takes place, that we forget everything that happened in the first 3 years. It's just we cannot consciously recollect it. Now, the thing is, it's not like those first 3 years don't matter. They do matter. But what happens to those and how are they stored? And here Lemma, explains it actually really beautifully. She says that those memories, especially the ones from the first 3 years and of course onwards, are stored in the procedural memory. So this is also known as the implicit or non-declarative memory, which actually includes emotional memory. That might already shed a bit of light on what this is about. And so this is the underlying organization for unconscious, routinized patterns, a way of being in the world and with others. And this memory system, it, doesn't show in concrete memories we recall, but how we behave. This is the memory that we act out. For example, if I go back to Italy, I run around through Rome looking very confused with this big map, I just can't find my way. But for some reason, I'm not consciously thinking I can't ask anyone for help because people cannot be trusted and I will look stupid if I ask anyone for help. This is not what I consciously think. It's just, it's acted out. I just run around, like a chicken without a head, not knowing where to go and not being able to ask anyone. So those are the two memory systems that we have available, and they operate independently from each other. And this is summarized in one of the quotes from the book, which I really enjoyed. And it is, "In this sense, it is both true to say that we do not forget and that we cannot remember very early events, thereby explaining their continued hold over us in the absence of conscious recollection of the formative experiences in our early childhood." Really enjoyed that. The next book I read was Feminine Psychology by Karen Horney. It's not technically one of her books because it's actually an essay collection of her earliest writings. So anything she wrote from 1922 to 1937. And honestly, if you would have given me this book to read for the first 100 pages without telling me who the author is, I would have never thought that this is written by Karen Horney. It really makes such a difference. You can really tell that in the first 100 or maybe more pages, she really hasn't found her voice. She sounds very Freudian, but in a weird way, in a way that, it's not really authentic. So if you read this book, you can basically see her developing her own voice, which is maybe something to get out of this book, I guess. What really put this book on the map is that this is the first time that Karen Horney lays out her very first concept of womb envy, which is basically her alternative to penis envy, Freud's concept, because she basically said, Freud has no idea about women, which is true. Freud was most probably blinded by his own relationship with his mother, which is a topic for another day. But yeah, Karen Horney said, well, Freud has no idea about feminine psychology, so here are some new ideas. We shouldn't only assume that women envy men because of their penis and they also want to have one and then they develop their neurosis. But also, if you analyze men, you find that they're actually jealous of women's capacity to give birth and to create life, and that actually a lot of male, creativity, business drive, like ambition, all of that might be a way to make up for this lack of the capacity to bear life. And yeah, she, throughout this book, if you really read it, and I think this is really only interesting for people who either study feminine psychology, like very specifically, and want to go to the roots of where it all started. For the rest of you, this is not a very interesting book, except maybe, the last couple of essays where she really finds more of her voice. But then again, the last chapter is something that she also writes about in the neurotic personality of her time. So yeah, to me, not worth it unless you are like me and you want to read everything that Karen Horney has ever written. And again, if you want to go through my notes from this book, feel free to sign up to my newsletter. I'm going to put the notes on feminine psychology, which I wrote out on my laptop. I'm going to put them in there so you can read the highlights for yourself. And with that, the last book I finished in November 2024. I really like this one. It's called A Mind of Her Own, The Life of Karen Horney by Susan Quinn. I really like reading biographies. I really, really enjoy it. I think, there's no better way if you are stuck on a thinker or you really want to understand a thinker in as much depth as possible. You need to know their biography because you can never divide the thinker from the theory. Every thinker involuntarily bases their theories on their own origin story, on their own childhood, on their own experiences. And in a way, we could conceptualize all those theories as a very personalized psychotherapy framework for one specific person that hopefully is applicable to more than just one person. So yeah, I love reading biographies, and I thought this was a fantastic biography. I know there's at least another, if not another 2 biographies written about Karen Horney. The other, I think, is by, what's his name? Benjamin Paris? Something Paris. I haven't read that one. I might also read it and then give you a comparison, which one I like more. I think that would be fun. But for now, I'm content with only one biography. And I think Susan Quinn, she does a beautiful job. She takes you through Karen Horney's entire life, and she gives those valuable context information of what was it like to be a woman at the turn of the century? What was it like to be one of the first women to study medicine? It's really fascinating. And I think she finds a beautiful balance between being a fan, being enthusiastic about Karen Horney and her life, and also being critical to look at, the things that she did that maybe weren't great. So yeah, I really like it. And there's some real psychodynamic gossip in this book. One was, which I didn't know, that Karen Horney most likely had a romantic relationship / affair with Erich Fromm. And then also, I just love getting insights into where people lived. I could look up, the house where she was born on Google Maps in Hamburg. She actually studied in Freiburg, a town in southern Germany where I also studied. So I could, follow where were her apartments. And of course, it was in a street where I would pass by all the time because it's so close to the university. She took a trip to Japan, and when I was reading this book, I was in Japan. So it felt like a lot of coincidences. So yeah, it made me really happy to read this book. I really enjoyed it. It was such a quick read, and I loved to get this, what feels like behind the scenes of her theories. Because Susan Quinn actually, she did a lot of research. She contacted Karen Horney's daughters. She has 3 daughters, and Susan Quinn contacted them, got a lot of material from them as well. Quinn, like, she visited all the places, she went into archives. You can really tell, like, she was dedicated. This woman did a good job. I also read the biography of Heinz Kohut, and I'm kind of on my way through the biography of Freud, but I gotta show you this. I don't know if you can see it. Like, this is the biography of Freud. You know, it's how many pages? It's probably like 600 plus. Yeah, almost 900 pages. Like, you know, like, this is going to take me forever, and I'm sure it's going to be worth it. But yeah, Susan Quinn's book was a lot more digestible. I think, wait, what did I write down? It has 480 pages, probably, you know, minus a couple because of the index. So yeah, I mean, if you want to really dive into Freud, this Peter Gay biography, I got it in German, but I think the original is in English. It's supposed to be really, really good. But yeah, I still have I still have a way to go. And if you want to start with Karen Horney's, you know, feel free to get the Susan Quinn version. As soon as I get my hands on the Paris version, I'm going to let you know if I like that one better. And I can also recommend the biography about Heinz Kohut, written by, I think, Streusser. I always forget what he's called. I'm going to put the details on that over here so that you can check it out. And yeah, those were the books I finished in October and November. If I do a very quick math, I read over, 1,000 pages in October and November, which is not too bad. And yeah, covered topics from the Oedipus complex to Fairbairn to more introductory books, and then lots of Karen Horney. And there's more to come. In the next recap, I'm going to tell you all about a new book that I read from Karen Horney, which I didn't know existed before, and I really, really enjoyed it. So sign up for my newsletter if you don't want to miss this. As I said, this was very chatty, very all over the place. I'm sorry if it's more confusing than bringing clarity, but if nothing else, I hope that I was a good companion for your lunch or your breakfast. And yeah, thank you for being here. I'm very much looking forward to taking you along on a deep dive of the Waning of the Oedipus complex by Hans Loewald. I mean, that sounds kind of enticing, doesn't it? I hope you're going to stick around. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.